Neurodivergence, Parenting, and Marriage. We welcome Tami, Caesar, Michael, and Samantha Katchy. A short introduction here. We have Samantha and Michael work with Fast Track ABA. Actually, they're the founders of Fast Track ABA. And Tami Caesar is a licensed counselor associate, and she works with the Latari Group and Rejoice Counseling. So a little introduction here. Samantha, Tami, and Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to read a little bit of your bios, and then we'll get into today's topic. We have so much information to share today, guys. We're not going to have time for questions. If you do have questions, we will place information for our speakers in the chat so that you can contact them more directly, or contact them at Fast Track ABA or the Latari Group. So Samantha's worked with individuals with developmental disabilities for over a decade. She graduated from the University of Houston Clear Lake with a degree in psychology in 2011 and earned a master's in applied behavior analysis with an emphasis in autism. Samantha is passionate about the importance of early intervention and providing parent-caregiver training. Individuals and families living with autism spectrum disorder thrive on understanding, practical support, and effective tools. She says, "My goal is for every family to recognize their light and let it shine." Michael is a co-founder of Fast Track ABA, the Fast Track ABA Center, where he works alongside his wife, Samantha, to provide exceptional applied behavior analysis, that's what ABA stands for, to individuals with autism spectrum needs. He's a graduate in finance from the University of Houston downtown and has a background in finance and business development across various industries, including oil and gas, logistics, and the medical sector. Before founding Fast Track ABA, Michael's connection to the neurodivergent community was built through years of volunteering. He focused on helping families manage their finances, support homemakers in securing meaningful employment, and advocating for individuals with developmental disabilities. Tami Caesar is a licensed marriage and family therapist associate. She has a master's degree in marriage and family therapy from the Houston Christian University and has worked with children and adults on the autism spectrum, also with ADHD, anxiety, substance use, and grief, especially as a behavior therapist most recently. We welcome you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about neurodivergence. What does that mean?
Okay, I'll go. So when we speak of neurodivergence, we're actually referring to the differences in the way someone is thinking about things, how they're looking at their behaviors, how they're processing information, and their experiences in the world. So the differences are not considered deficits, but rather just variations from what is considered neurotypical. So the typical development, cognitive, and behavioral functioning.
Okay, so are there lots of conditions that are considered neurodivergent? Because this is kind of a new term, I guess.
Yes, so this term's actually come up pretty recently, but anyone can actually be neurodivergent. It often includes individuals that are diagnosed or undiagnosed with, I'm going to list a few of the what we've seen conditions. So autism spectrum disorder, that's ASD, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, so that's like ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, sensory processing disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, intellectual disabilities. Now, mental health differences like anxiety or bipolar disorder, though are not always included, some argue that they should be considered as part of the neurodivergence population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are we talking about here, I guess, because yes, it's a little bit, talk to me more about it.
When we're talking about neurodivergence, we have to understand it's really just a brain difference. That just means someone is processing the world differently from how we are processing the world. So we're talking about social interaction, we're talking about how they learn, how they interact with each other, how their attention is affected. All of this is just how someone looks at the world very differently from how we look at the world. So it really shifts the focus of pathology to variation.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
So divergent, like different, not
different.
less.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. And when do people realize that, or when does this develop in people, or when can they realize that they have this?
So we're seeing a lot of early intervention now, this early childhood intervention. Now we do see that sometimes, especially in women and in girls, that we see it a little bit later on in childhood. It could be adolescent, it could be even adulthood. But this is typically at our center, we've had kiddos all the way up to 12 months to 15 months that were screened and may not have the diagnosis of autism, but they've screened for some concerns regarding their social, their eye contact, just warning signs that moms typically catch and dads typically catch. And they're like, something doesn't feel right. And so they go to the pediatrician or they go to the neurologist and they check to see milestones. But we've seen, I would say maybe 6 years ago, I had more kiddos that were between 2.5 and 3. But the last 2 years at the center, we've had kids that have been young until like 12 months. So no diagnosis officially of autism, but they saw some signs that were just concerning. So that's how early we've noticed it.
Yeah. So my son actually, when he was about 18 months, we started realizing he had a speech delay because he was supposed to by 2 years have 50 words and he like barely had any at 18 months. So we started with some speech therapy. And then we realized he had sensory seeking behaviors. So we thought it was sensory processing disorder, right?
Yeah.
So then, but then at 2 years, I guess it was, or 2.5, we were able to do the autism screening for the 3-year-old program here where we live through the public school. And it turned out he met the criteria for high functioning autism. So due to like preferred behaviors. So, I mean, there's so much, I guess the reason I'm sharing that is because it sounds like there's so much that interweaves between all of these diagnoses.
Correct.
And that, as young as 12, 18 months, parents can start to realize like something must be going on. Like this isn't exactly this. Yeah.
And I think we've noticed too culturally, right? I know we're going to talk about culture in a bit, but I think also if you're living with extended family and someone says, oh, well, I don't know, I'm going to throw a name out. John took time to talk, so don't worry about it. He'll catch up. And, so there's also the culture, like when family members or extended family or the society is saying things like, hey, no, that'll be fine. He'll grow out of it. Sometimes I think it can cause like, okay, maybe I'm overreacting. And so maybe that too, a bit later of a diagnosis.
Well, what are common difficulties parents of neurodivergent children sometimes face? Michael, will give you a chance to talk here.
Just starting off with navigating the diagnosis and services. That's always tends to be a really dark area for most parents once they get the diagnosis or get an understanding of there may be some challenges here. Then when they start the process, typically you see long wait times, lack of access to specific specialists, and then you're looking at the delayed and how the recognition or the misdiagnosis. And like Sam said earlier, when it comes to girls and certain people from certain demographics, then there's the emotional strain, and the feelings of guilt, grief, uncertainty, or isolation. There's a chronic stress from managing meltdowns, whether it could be in school, it could be at restaurants, grocery stores. It can take a toll on parent emotionally. Then there's advocacy burnout. Parents will always be their child's biggest advocate, and they should be, but because of the nature of having to be longevity with it, it can lead to a lot of burnout, especially when there's a lack of support. Because you have to constantly to advocate to appropriate school accommodations, especially if kids start climbing and they need these art meetings, IEPs, etc., and just dealing with insurance. Yeah, your insurance policy may have these things that should be made available to your child, but then now to be able to access it, you have to now learn how to climb a whole new entire mountain, and then sometimes getting those approvals or authorizations could be really, really difficult. There's the financial pressure. Out-of-pocket costs, whether it's insurance or if it's private paid, it can take its toll on most families' budget. There's no really real way to get around that except that a lot of these services, there's a cost associated with it, because you're trying to find the best people, the best personnel that can also provide you with the best resources. And so we've seen cases where parents may have to try to take additional job, or sometimes they may be given a solution to where maybe certain aspects of support should be done by one parent, which may cause one parent to have to leave a job. So now you're talking about whatever their income was just went away from the household because of their priority of meeting the needs of the child. The social isolation. So because of people who may not be aware or know, so most families tend to be isolated to themselves, away from friends and families, because their friends and families don't really understand the needs of their child. There's opportunities for social activities, especially when parents are a little bit apprehensive with their child, not knowing if they're going to engage in certain behavior or tantrum, not want to deal with the feeling of being possibly embarrassed. So they just kind of shy away from just all social activities. And this leads to judgment of others, blame from strangers or relatives. Typically, you hear people say things like, "Oh, just a poor parent," or "If I was that person's parent, I would do it this way." And we can only imagine when you hear these things, like what that would do to us, let alone somebody who's actually dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. And just a lack of empathy in public spaces. Which is, I know society we're improving, but it still doesn't take away the fact if someone goes into a certain space, they don't feel included, or feel that there's empathy or understanding.
Yeah, I definitely can identify with some of those, especially like the socially isolating, because you need to have your kid in an enclosed space because they might run off, or you don't want to have to just completely hold them the whole time, and then they start screaming or having some kind of tantrum, some kind of behavior, and it's not socially appropriate. So then you end up only going out with friends who understand what's going on with your kid, and you only go to certain places, or you only stay home because you just can't be out in public, like in a big open space, right? So Tami, did you have any other thoughts on what difficulties parents might suffer and a marriage might suffer?
Um, I'm going to speak to the marriage. A lot of times,
Okay.
both parents may not be on the same, in agreement on the diagnosis of the child. So we see that a lot where one parent is the advocate for the child because of this diagnosis, and the other parent has not accepted the diagnosis. So then that puts a strain within the family. It goes back to what Samantha was speaking about, the cultural. If it's two different cultural values, or the way that husband was raised as opposed to the way mother was raised, and so sometimes those behaviors can pose as, oh, they're just acting up and you're being too soft, or you're too, and so that just poses problems in the marriage because one parent may not feel supported by the other and they feel like they're doing it alone. Another thing it could be is that the parent that's the advocate for the child may feel like they're not even getting support from like an in-law. So, example, my husband's family may not be supportive because they have their own opinion of what's going on with our child. And so it may put the husband in between, what he's feeling for his household as husband and child and wife, as opposed to the extended family as well. So it puts a lot of strain on the marriage. It can also put a lot of strain on if there are other children within the family, in the household, where children that do not have neurodivergence disorders. So it also puts a strain on that, where now the other parents are advocating for the children with non-neurodivergent disorders, and there's another, and so there's a tear. There's always a divide. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Samantha, did you want to add anything to what Tami said?
No, actually, that's exactly what I was going to say. During parent trainings, we see that. I'm sitting with mom and dad, and I'm excited to tell them, all right, we've got the plan. I've got the research to back me up, and this is what we're going to do. and then I see mom and dad, and there's like a rupture between that relationship. And I'm like, okay, I'm not a counselor, but now I'm like forced to like get into the space. And so I'm like, okay, hold on. Are we on the same page? And then again, they're like two separate, you're sitting on the sofa, one's on right and one's on the left. And I'm like, okay, guys, I can't work with this. Like, we're going to have to be on the same page for your kiddo, because no intervention that I have from whatever textbook or whatever my experience and expertise is going to work here. Like, mom, mom did not cause autism. Mom, dad did not cause autism. None of your families cause. We don't know what causes it. So in order for y'all to continue services with me, I need y'all to be buddies. I need y'all to be in love. I need y'all to, I don't know, get together. And then
I need y'all to go see Tami.
Yeah. Now I'm like, let me slip, Rejoice, because now we just refer to you guys. We're like, hey, go here, because that's not my but because I do feel like it's not just it's two individuals coming with their two individual backgrounds. We're talking about how they were raised, their culture, their background, their trauma, all of that comes together. And now they have to take care of this little innocent child, and we don't understand the language. We have no idea what they're saying. And of course, with time you do, but no, I everything Tami said, I'm like, yes, I see that. But
yes.
Yeah. I think oftentimes, even in marriages where the children are neurotypical, parenting becomes a point of division between parents, right? And there's the lenient parent and the strict parent oftentimes. So then when you have a medical condition or a neurodivergence that creates an even more stressful situation, I think it is even more important for the parents to be on the same page, but it's also more difficult. So they have to first understand the condition and be on the same page about what it is. It's not a misbehavior. He's not tantruming because he's or she is just a bad kid, right? Or trying to make you mad today.
Yeah. And I think this, then what I've noticed, it cuts down on intimacy. It cuts down on the date night, because now if we have to be intimate, I really can't be intimate because I'm so mad at you, because I've had some resentment against you. And then even if you try to be intimate, the husband always knows you're faking it, and you're like, oh my gosh, now we're in a bigger issue. So I think a lot of times then everything starts breaking down, right? Like one conversation stops happening, then another conversation, then we don't go for date nights. Well, the last thing we want to do is just rest and sleep. I remember we did a parent timeout session where kids got dropped off with us and parents got to go on a date, and we were so excited because we were like, where are you gonna go? And they were like, we're just gonna go home and take a shower. We're just gonna go home and take a nap. And I guess I did not, like, just to get that feedback, because I'm thinking, great, date night, y'all get to be romantic and rekindle all your love. And they were like, no, we just need to take a shower in peace, like, just to know that my kid's not going to run off. Right. And of course, autism is a spectrum. So we're not saying that every kid is the same way. But that intimacy starts to rupture. And I think if there's no intimacy, what is, our faith and everything's connected to family. Our church is connected to family. And so, that's huge.
And I think also what happens with that intimacy, because intimacy is not even the passion. Intimacy is just I see you, husband, and let's get through this, and let me do a check-in with you. How are you? Or let me check in with you, wife. I see that I've been working all day and you've been at home. Let me check in. How are you? Okay, we finally got him together. Let's work together. And we finally got them down. And so now this is our time. Cup of coffee, sit on the back patio. And how was your day? We made it. And that's where the disconnect happens, because now it's like they both go into their own corners. Like they retreat and say, I need a shower because you've been at work all day and you don't know what I've been dealing with. And he's like, well, I just fought traffic and I do understand, but now I'm worried about the bills. And did you buy something else? And it's like, okay, this is where, for me, I tell my couples that when it's time to go back in with you guys, let all the other stuff go and check into that person that you met, that you started dating. Like when you saw him, hey, boy meets girl. Go back to that. Go back to, hey, how are you? before the children and reconnect with each other on that, because y'all are in that box by yourself. Like the kid box is connected, but you're in this box, the husband and wife. So y'all were boyfriend, girlfriend. Hey, I like this girl. Y'all were in that box. And so that's when you go back to that box, not saying that I'm forgetting that we have to pay these bills or this is coming up or dance or we got therapies or whatever. No, it's okay to take that moment to say, okay, how are you? How was your day? And that's where the reconnect happens, because what you see is the disconnect. Even in saying, I just want to take a shower. As a marriage and family therapist, I'd say, well, make sure y'all do it together. You wash her back and she washes yours. And that's still a reconnect of like, we got to shower and I scrubbed your back and we ain't did this in forever. That's where we help the reconnect. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, talking about financial stress, Michael, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what might be some strains that people face? Maybe I'm freezing up. I don't know.
Well, some of the strains, I'll jump in, and Michael, you can jump in. That may be is just the medical cost, the therapies, coverages that are not, things that are not covered, and having to pay for it out of pocket. It may be a one income household. And you're trying to manage that, you have a child who is not only you're dealing with being neurodivergent, but I have to also take off of work to go to ARD meetings. Just a whole bunch of, who can babysit, just a whole bunch of things that happens. And, just one income alone in our economy, that's a stress. If they went from a two income household and just managing that could be some of the expenses. I think medical expenses are probably the biggest chunk of like getting insurance to cover, because that's big. A lot of insurance companies do not cover some of the things that you need for a child with neurodivergence, especially ABA, mental health therapy, a lot of that costs that parents want that extra help. Does that make sense? They cover the help for the medical side, like the medications and things like that, but like the therapies that's needed, a lot of times they're not covered, and parents are having to foot that cost for themselves or go without that therapy for their child.
And from what I've seen a lot, it's kind of hard to tell a parent sometimes that yes, I see your commitment here, but I don't see it completely financially. Because like what Tami was saying earlier, when it comes to just now about all the costs, the income, the current economy, etc. What I've seen, at least with like half the parents that I've helped, is we had to get them to relook at their budget and reconsider a priority of how they doing their finances. And sometimes you would think that they will naturally think those things, and unfortunately, that's not always the case. Like I'm pretty sure, like we have things about us that you would think, wait a minute, wouldn't you already be thinking about that? But no, and sometimes it's something as simple as buying clothes, going to restaurants, spending money on certain food. I know it sounds crazy telling somebody what they can buy and not buy, but once you help the parent shift their perspective financially, from what I see, it's still a struggle financially. It doesn't get there, but once they have established budget with established how they earmark their monies and income is coming into the household, it tends to be a little better. And the other thing is when it comes to insurance, is helping them identify how to make the appropriate selections during open enrollment. Oftentimes what happens is they look at open enrollment and see which one is the least amount of premium per month coming out of their paycheck. And they're not really thinking about what my out-of-pocket costs are going to be for these therapies because sometimes they don't even know. Like because they say they got the diagnosis after they got they did the open enrollment. But then so what we do is we try to like 2 or 3 months leading up to the open enrollment say, listen, your out-of-pocket was up to 15,000. You had speech, you had occupational, you had physical therapy, you got these other services, obviously our services. you told me you paid only $100 or so a month on your premium. It's about $1,200 a year compared to the 15,000 that you just had to come out of or go into debt for. If you spent, let's say, $300 a month for the higher plan, you only spend like now $3 grand out of pocket. And now you just help them walk through that. All of a sudden, they start seeing more and more opportunities to feel a little bit more free. Again, it doesn't solve 100% of their financial issues, but it's a tremendous start.
Michael, do you do individual, like, do you meet with couples individually to talk about this kind of stuff? To help them plan?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Like, do you, that suggestion that you just gave, right, to help somebody analyze their insurance and pick, decide on what plan to pick, do you meet with people, like, is that one of the services that y'all offer?
Yes, yeah, we
Okay.
provide the service. We don't charge for it. It's like a courtesy.
Oh, wow.
But
Okay.
also, about half of the parents, or more than half of the families that we've helped, never really become our clients. So, and this is just something that, again, like part of my background in this community was things that I was already doing that I really know I was doing, and then, but it's a need, and so now we're very intentional about that. From now intake to as we continue to go into open, so we know most families, the open enrollment ends if the end of the calendar year. We're already starting helping them September, October prep for it. We try to have also a calendar to know about the other parents that may have an off, whose plan doesn't follow a calendar year, to kind of help them. But no, this is something I'm very intentional about, because it's one thing being able to get services for us, because depending on how the insurance breaks down, some policies or most policies fall under the behavior portion, which doesn't necessarily come in contact with the medical, even though it's like they should all be the same. And so there's cases where they have zero out of pocket with us because of their plan, but they still have a high deductible, high out of pocket for other services that's necessary. It's important: speech, occupational therapy, going to get their annual visits that we ask them to do when they go to see the neurologist. Those things can be really, really expensive. So we help them identify how to make their appropriate selections in open enrollment, but also just helping them advocate and identify other resources so they can get funding, as well as some of the other organizations that we're tied to, because that also helps, to get a certain approval or an award. But I guess to answer your question in short, yes, we sit down with them and do it.
Oh no, she's
you're muted?
Sorry, I was muted. Does anybody else want to add something before we move on to our next question or next topic?
I would only say that, we were talking about autism, but and I think Tami touched on it too, but autism is comorbid. So a lot of times we will have multiple different conditions with autism. So ADHD is a huge one. So a lot of times kids may not be diagnosed with autism, but there's ADHD component. And so right now, one of my, something that I'm working on is trying to figure out how do we get insurance companies to acknowledge that ABA services are not just for children with autism, right? It's neurodivergent. So we need to look at that ADHD component, because at schools, they may go into a regular classroom, but they're struggling and there needs to be some kind of self-regulation or some, self-management techniques. And so that's something, with insurance, it's tough when parents come to us and say, oh, but he has ADHD and not autism. Well, the insurance is only covering autism diagnosis, not ADHD diagnosis. And so that adds to that financial strain on the families.
Yeah, working with insurance is just really a trouble. It's a lot of trouble.
One thing that I have done here in the clinic here, because we see a lot of our, we have a lot of people that are on private insurance, but we also have a big population of Medicaid. And so I've kind of got myself educated on like what Medicaid covers and what they don't cover, and some of the services. And also because of our big population of Medicaid, I was able to like realize some of the resources. So even as a therapist, and even with you guys with ABA, you wear that hat of like helping your families, either from a social component, financial. For me, even when it comes to ARD meetings, like I'm writing letters of recommendation based on whatever's on their CARS testing results that says what they need from an emotional behavioral standpoint, even if they're not autistic, even if it is ADHD and we're dealing with behaviors, and the kids are also dealing with anxiety because of having ADHD, because they're trying to do the work, but their brain is not letting them, and then they're being yelled at, and then I'm disappointing parent. And my dad is like, oh, you're not doing good, or my mom is like, they have me with these high expectations. So a lot of times within the school systems, even if your child is not struggling academically, the school will, I've had this with the public schools where they'll throw it back and say, oh, they're fine because they're making the grade, or they're in pre-AP or AP, but the kids are struggling. They're struggling to be that, or they're trying to work on doing it, and they may be taking, medicine for ADHD. And so that is also been a fight for parents, because the school has conditioned them to say, well, when they're asking for the social emotional supports for their child, or for the extra help or the extra time, to that is allowed under the ARD programs, a lot of parents get pushback from the school, because then they look at the child's academic process and say, well, they're not failing, so why? So that's another struggle that we work with, and that parents probably also work with, in trying to get the help that their child needs, because you have someone that's just looking at the surface and saying, well, they're doing good, their grades are not falling,
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it sounds like sometimes families might be able to navigate this just using the public school services. But what are some warning signs? I'm going to skip down a little bit in some of our questions, but what are some warning signs that a family might need professional help for their child, or professional help as a marriage, or for their parenting?
So we say that when you feel overwhelmed almost all the time, and your interactions with your child are starting to become like you don't want to interact with anyone, you want to be by yourself, that's a red flag, because we are created for connection. And so anytime we feel like we don't need connection, and like Tami and Michael said, we want isolation, that is a big sign. When you start to yell and shut down for things that typically are not things that you would yell, and your blood pressure is going up, when something's off, and you're like, okay, that did not require that response. When you feel helpless or hopeless, and you really do not believe that there's any hope coming out of the situation, like you feel hopeless, you feel like, what's the point of prayer, what's the point of going to mass, what's the point of these things, like I don't what's the point? There's just, when you start to feel that way about things that are very important to you, that's a red flag. Like, this is what we pay attention during parent training, kind of gauging where someone is. When your child's needs are affecting your mental health, that's something to think about too. Is your child asking you for stuff and wanting something from you that you don't have, and then that you're trying to give it and you still don't have it because you're an empty, right? There's no time for self-routine, there's no time for self-care. And then just also not understanding your child's diagnosis, not understanding that, look, I know it's autism, I know it's ADHD, I know it's OCD, but I don't understand it. I think that's sometimes to like reach out for like someone who can walk you and help you navigate through that journey.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to add for the marriage, one of the biggest warning signs that happens, and I think people fall into and they don't realize, is when you start feeling like, I'm just going through the motions. Like, and I hear that a lot within my marriages, where they just feel like, I'm just going through the motions. Like, get up, get ready to work. You deal with it. Like, when you feel like where you're not remembering or focused on what was my day, that you're just going through the motions, it's just going. That's another big warning sign that it's starting to go down. And a lot of times that happens even before the overwhelmed, you're just going through the motions. And so that just becomes the complacent. Okay, get up, we're going to mass. And in mass, okay, be quiet. You're having to, okay, go to CCE. I already know that they're going to come tell me that he did da 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 da. And so you're going through the motions. And when you feel like it just become redundant and nothing has changed and it's just the same and it's just going and going and there's nothing different, that's when you have to check maybe do a self check and say, do we need to go talk to somebody? Like something is not right. Because life should not be just that I'm going through the motions. And that could be one parent or the other parent or both parents. And a lot of times when they start going through the motions, then you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing. And even with the kids, it's just like, whatever, I'm going to give you this tablet. Are you good? Okay, fine, good. And those are the behaviors and the actions that start before people even decide to go get help because they're trying to manage it themselves. Does that make sense? Like, okay, Jimmy is yelling, and when they don't get their way and they're yelling and they're breaking down, and well, okay, I know that this works, so let me just give them this. But when you feel like, when you're going through those motions, that's a big warning sign or a red flag for marriages and parents.
Awesome. Anybody else want to add? Michael, you want to add anything?
No, what Samantha and Tami said is there's plenty. It covers all things encompassing.
Okay.
Just figuring out ways to get support from your spouse. Being able to communicate. Gotta have those lines of communications open.
I'll share something.
Okay.
Instead of parent training that don't.
Oh, actually, I think you're on mute and Michael's not. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Sorry.
There we go.
We tell our parents at parent training, don't wait for a crisis to now seek help so what we try to do is we have a mandatory parent meeting once a week with our parents. So even if you don't have anything to talk about, it's fine. We're still just going to meet and we can just talk about whatever, but it's just an avenue that they're both supposed to be together and they're with one of the clinicians. And so I think that's something, because a lot of times, we're tired, we're exhausted, and we're waiting to have this meeting because it's been a crisis. And in my experience, whenever there's a crisis, a lot of times you can't really find solutions. Like there should have been antecedent interventions. What do we do when this happens, right? But again, that's idealistic and that's, but I think that's something for parents to think about. Hey, everything's going great in our marriage. We're figuring this out, but maybe we should just schedule some time to go talk to a counselor just to make sure everything is going smoothly. So instead of waiting for that crisis to hit.
That's so true. Well, let's move into some practical tips. Do you guys have any actionable or practical tips for navigating family life?
For family, like just family life, like regular routines?
Yeah, kind of like some.
I think Michael and I, we've been talking recently about just having creating our own traditions and our own culture within our family. And so there's some great resources too. And the Catholic faith gives you so many wonderful feasts to do something on one day, right? And so I think for us, what we've used is we're using that system of okay, today is this saint's day. And so what can we do that's connected to just something to keep everyone on the same page? Because again, most of our families don't just have one child, it's multiple children. And so what's happening to the sibling? And how are they spending time with the family? And so creating more, activities that all can be together in the room. If it's maybe a short movie, that all of us together. So just doing more of an inclusive approach, and then having a routine where, if you do go to mass on Sunday, then you go to mass on Sunday, or, sometimes if you do a Saturday evening or a Sunday evening, but maintaining those routines and that structure, because from research and from what I've experienced too, that structure is very important for someone who needs that to self-regulate. So a lot of times we may think, oh, it's been a busy week. when they come home, let them relax and do whatever they want. But a lot of times my data has shown that that style does not work for our kiddos on the spectrum. They need to have structure. They need to have structure. They need to have rules, because it helps them regulate, and it's the fear of the unknown, right? What's going to happen next? Now, I understand, like, roads are shut down all the time because it's construction on something. And so, there's some things parents can control, and then there's some things you can't control. So I would say, be aware of the change in routine, like small things you can change around, but try to come up with something that y'all can commit to. It doesn't have to be full hours of like sitting and doing something. I really always say it's about quality than quantity of time with the kiddos. Even if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, that just starts to have that good routine going, of that rapport building, that trust building. And then that's the springboard for the whole day.
Cool. Yeah, that's something that's different about kids on the spectrum, is they really do need that structure and they thrive in it. And I notice with my little guy, if something's like not what he's expecting, it's when the tantrums hit, So,
the other thing can I add to that? The other thing I'm going to add to that is because if you have a family with multiples, right? And so you have one child who is neurodivergent, but the other children are not. A lot of times those children feel as if all of the focus and everything we do is because of this child. And so there's a little resentment that may build up there. There may be things that may build up within those children as far as feeling disconnected. And so I always encourage families that, yes, have a structure, maintain that in the home, but also have those one-on-ones. Schedule a time so that you can do check-in, or even just time for that child, those other children too, so that they can feel like you're a part of, and that everything around the household is not just because of this one child. So we also have to make sure that with our families with multiples, that we focus on the other children as well, or we include them, even though they're included in this. A lot of times from a psychological perspective, especially if they're younger, their mind will be thinking like, well, we're doing this for this person. What about me? Does that make sense? So you don't want people to feel left out. So I think that should be incorporated whenever we're thinking about, creating the structures and the routine. Maybe there can be a day where dad is at home with this one and mom is going to go do one-on-one with, the older sibling or the other child. I think that's important as well.
Absolutely, Tami. That is such a great point. Guys, I'm noticing we only have like 2 more minutes today, so I think we are definitely going to have a follow-up. This conversation has been so enriching. I wanted to give each of you maybe a moment just to have some closing. Anything you would like to say just to end?
Yeah, I guess I would say that what brought me into the field was this one time I remember praying to God and asking him, what causes autism? Like, why? Like, why is this happening? Because I couldn't solve the problem. I couldn't take away the pain from the parents and the caregivers. And I remember him reminding me of the scripture where they're walking and then they see a blind man. And so the disciples ask, oh my gosh, why do you think he's this way? Is it because it's the sins of his parents? And Jesus says, no, it's for the glory of God to be revealed. And that was all the Holy Spirit gave me, just that scripture. And throughout my 12 years of being in the field now, I promise you, every time an assessment has told me that a kid cannot talk or a kid cannot do something, it's just a reminder that God is with us in that situation and that it's always for his glory to be revealed. So I hope that it may not look great right now, and it may look like you're not doing great as a parent, but you're not alone. And I do believe, and we pray for everyone that, especially our families living with autism, y'all don't give up hope, because your kids will surprise you. It's just a matter of time, So that's what I would want to share.
So for me, I'm going to end on the reason that I became a therapist. I prayed about it. My first career is nursing, been in trauma, ER. Last job I was working as a nurse was transplant. So when I came into therapy and I prayed about it, the words "talk about it" came to my head. And I was like, talk about what? And he was like, talk about it. So what I'm going to leave with my parents is, even with having a child that is neurodivergent, we're going to put all our focus on our child. But I encourage you guys to talk about it. Talk about what it is. If the it is, husband, today I don't feel like you were helping me. I need the communication. Talk about it, because that's how you're able to get a lot of the overwhelming feelings out, because a lot of times we're bottling it up, and we're afraid to talk about it because we're afraid that people don't understand. So my closing words is to talk about it. And if you don't have family or safe space to talk about it, reach out to professional help, to talk about it. And that's all, that a lot of times we need, is that we can work through it once we have a discussion with one another, listening, to each other's point of view, understanding a different perspective and seeing it differently. Because with our kiddos with autism, and ADHD, a lot of times, because their little brains only are concrete thinking, we have to teach them how to do that, just that, talk about it. And the behavior, a lot of times they're using their behaviors to express what they're feeling or they can't say. So if we as parents and providers talk about it, it helps them to express verbally.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Michael, your closing words?
Yeah, what I would just say is, for me, I would say about a year or two into the company is when I kind of realized, we were doing an assessment, and there was a dad walking in and out of the front lobby. He was on the phone, and I was looking at the camera because the door chime kept going in and off. I'm like, why is this gonna keep going out of the door? And then suddenly, something just hit me. He's like, hey, he's dependent on you. And I'm like, he can't be dependent on me. I'm not the one providing the services. But yeah, he's dependent on you to ensure that you have the people that can be there for his son. And then I don't know how, but suddenly in that moment, everything clicked for me. And so my perspective like really, really changed. And so it started making me think about, okay, so I'm doing this now, not just for the business or the company. It's for the team, it's for the clients, it's for the parents. And so it's like it made me think of more of a broader sense of community and of in the environment that we're in. And so then what I would encourage a lot of families to do is also consider joining some other groups of like parents, or people who just get it. There's something affirming about knowing that there's other people that may be experiencing the same, that have the same experiences as you. Um, you still have our Lord and Savior, but there's also when you have another human in the flesh that's able to communicate back and forth experiences, and that seems to also bring a light to some parents. So that'd be what I'll leave off for today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, guys. You guys are absolutely doing a wonderful service for parents of children with autism. And so if anybody would like to reach out to ABA Fast Track, or the Fast Track ABA Center, sorry for mispronouncing, right? And to Tami at the Leitare Center, we've put that information in the chat. We'll have a recording of this webinar out to you guys in an email within the next week or so. And we really appreciate you joining us. Hope you guys have a great week, and thank you again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.
God bless.